Syria's civil war, its sectarian divisions, its Alawite rulers, none of that was an accident. France drew Syria's borders, designed its political system, and handed power to a minority community that made up just 12% of the population. This video is about how that happened and why the decisions made between 1920 and 1946 are still reshaping the Middle East today. In 1916, Britain and France secretly divided the Arab world between themselves. This was the Sykes-Picot Agreement. France got Syria and Lebanon. Britain got Iraq, Palestine, and Jordan. At the time, World War I was still being fought. The Ottoman Empire, which had controlled this region for 400 years, was collapsing. Arab leaders believed that they had been promised independence in exchange for fighting alongside Britain against the Ottomans. That promise was not kept. In 1920, Arab nationalists declared an independent Syrian kingdom in Damascus. Faisal ibn Hussein was crowned king. His kingdom lasted only 4 months. France sent an army at the Battle of Maysalun in July 1920. French forces defeated the Syrian army in a single day. Faisal was expelled. France took control. The League of Nations formally awarded France the mandate over Syria and Lebanon at the same year. So France now controlled Syria, but the question is what it chose to do with that control. And the answer is where the story gets complicated. France did not govern Syria as a country. It broke it into pieces. It separated Lebanon from Syria entirely in 1920, creating what would become the modern state of Lebanon. The reason was partly to create a Christian majority state that France, as a Catholic power, could anchor its influence to. Inside Syria itself, France created separate administrative zones. The state of Damascus, the state of Aleppo, the Alawite state along the coast, and the Jabal Druze state in the south. This division was deliberate. France applied a policy it had used in other colonies: divide communities along religion and ethnic lines to prevent unified opposition. Arab Sunni nationalism was the political force France feared most. By empowering minority communities, Alawites, Druze, Christians, France created counterweights to that nationalism. Alawites, who had historically been a rural and marginalized community, were recruited heavily into the French-created military force, called the Troupes Spéciales du Levant. That military recruitment decision, made by French colonial officers in the 1920s, is a direct line to how Hafez al-Assad came to power in 1970s. We'll come back to that. French rule was not accepted without resistance. In 1925, a major uprising broke out across Syria, known as the Great Syrian Revolt. It began in the Jabal Druze region, led by Sultan al-Atrash, and quickly spread to Damascus and other cities. It involved Druze fighters, Arab nationalists, and rural communities across the country. France's response was severe. In October 1925, French aircraft and artillery bombarded residential neighborhoods of Damascus for 2 days. Large sections of the old city were destroyed. The revolt was suppressed in 1927. France retained control, but the uprising demonstrated that Syrian opposition to the mandate was widespread and cross-sectarian. This period is rarely covered in standard history curricula. It is one of the first instances of an aerial bombardment of a civilian urban area in modern history. France held Syria for another 2 decades after this. So what did the end of French rule actually look like? And what did France leave behind? Syria formally became independent in 1946 after France was pressured to withdraw its troops following World War II. Britain and the United States pushed France to leave, but independence did not mean stability. In 1949, just 3 years after independence, Syria experienced its first military coup. Then a second, then a third, all in the same year. The Syrian army, built by France to serve French interests, now became the primary political force in the country. The institutions France had created were not designed for democratic governance. The Alawite officers recruited into the French military force formed the core of Syria's post-independence army. Over the following decades, Alawite officers rose through the ranks. In 1963, the Ba'ath Party took power in a coup. In 1970, Hafez al-Assad, an Alawite Air Force general, seized control of the government. His family ruled Syria for the next 50 years. The democratic arithmetic France had engineered in the 1920s had produced a political outcome France itself did not have predicted, but has made structurally possible. And there's one thing that Syria left behind that shapes Syrian politics to this date, written into the constitutional structure of the country itself. The Syrian Mandate authorities created constitutional arrangements in Syria and Lebanon that gave disproportionate representation of religious minorities. In Lebanon, this became the National Pact of 1943, an unwritten agreement dividing the presidency, prime ministership, and parliament speaker's role between Maronite Christians, Sunni Muslims, and Shia Muslims based on a 1932 census. That arrangement still formally governs Lebanon today. In Syria, the pattern of using state institutions, particularly the military and intelligence services, as tool of sectarian management became embedded in how the state functioned. The French Mandate lasted 26 years. The structures it built, administrative, military, constitutional, lasted far longer. Modern Syria's borders, the separation of Lebanon, the Alawite path to political power, the weakness of civilian institutions, all of these trace directly to decisions made by French colonial administrators between 1920 and 1946. And that is how Syria was created, not as a natural nation, but as a colonial administrative unit, deliberately fragmented to serve French strategic interests. If you want to understand why the modern Middle East looks the way it does, the answer keeps coming back to the same decade, the 1920s. I'll link the previous video in the series below. Subscribe if you want to follow the story forward.